They say the darkest hour is just before dawn, but for David Reynolds, the darkness was just beginning. He walked through his front door at 6 a.m., smelling like cheap perfume and another woman's secrets, expecting a shower and a lie. What he found instead was a silence so loud it shattered his life. No screaming wife, no packed bags, just a single manila envelope sitting on the kitchen island, and a realization that while he was out playing games, his wife, Sarah, had been winning the war. Stick around, because this isn't just a divorce story. It's a masterclass in revenge. The distinct metallic click of the deadbolt sliding back echoed through the foyer of the sprawling colonial house in Chestnut Hill. It was 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. The sky outside was a bruised purple, threatening rain, the kind of heavy, humid morning that made your clothes stick to your skin. David Reynolds stepped inside, closing the door with a practiced softness. He held his breath, listening. He expected the rhythmic thump-thump of Sarah's treadmill from the home gym, or perhaps the hiss of the espresso machine in the kitchen. Silence. He exhaled, his shoulders dropping. Safe. David was a handsome man, though the morning light was doing him no favors. At 42, he had the jawline of a news anchor and the eyes of a man who believed his own lies. He rubbed his face, his hand rasping against the stubble. He smelled of stale gin, the distinct, cloying vanilla scent of Jessica's body lotion, and the underlying metallic tang of guilt, though he had long ago learned to suppress that last one. "Sarah," he called out, his voice a cracked whisper. He cleared his throat. "Sarah? You up?" He moved toward the kitchen, his Gucci loafers making no sound on the hardwood. He was already rehearsing the script. The deal ran late. The clients wanted to go to that cigar bar downtown. My phone died. I didn't want to wake you when I got in at 3, so I crashed in the guest room. Wait, no, I just got home. He needed to be careful. He pushed open the swinging door to the kitchen. It was a masterpiece of modern design. Carrara marble, Viking appliances, an island the size of a small boat. It was the kitchen Sarah had designed 3 years ago, arguing over grout colors with the contractor, Tony, while David checked his watch and texted his first mistress, a paralegal named Courtney. The kitchen was pristine. Too pristine. Usually there was a half-empty mug of herbal tea near the sink, a chaotic stack of mail on the counter. Sarah's iPad propped up with the morning news. Today, the surfaces were bare, except for the island. Right in the center of the marble expanse sat a single object, a thick, yellow manila envelope. David frowned. He walked over, his footsteps feeling heavy now. He saw a set of keys next to the envelope. Her keys, the ones with the little leather fob he'd bought her in Florence 5 years ago. Next to the keys was her wedding ring. The 3-carat oval diamond caught the grey morning light and threw it back coldly. His stomach did a slow, sickening flip. "Sarah!" he shouted, panic finally piercing his hangover. He ran to the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. "Sarah!" He burst into the master bedroom. The bed was made, not just made, but stripped and remade with the guest linens, the stiff, white ones they never used. The closet doors were wide open. He froze. Sarah's side of the walk-in closet was empty. It wasn't just that her clothes were gone. It was the completeness of the erasure. The hangers were gone. The shoe racks were bare. The shelves where she kept her collection of vintage handbags were wiped clean. Even the smell of her, that subtle mix of lavender and rain, seemed to have been scrubbed from the air. He rushed to the bathroom. Her vanity was cleared. No toothbrush, no serums, no hairbrush with stray blonde strands. She hadn't just left. She had uninstalled herself from his life. David ran back downstairs, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He snatched up the yellow envelope on the kitchen island. It wasn't sealed. He pulled out the stack of documents. The paper was heavy. Legal bond. The header at the top was bold and uncompromising. Superior Court of Massachusetts. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Jenkins vs. Reynolds. Attached to the front was a handwritten note. It wasn't written on stationery. It was written on the back of a receipt from the Gilded Lily, the boutique hotel downtown. The timestamp on the receipt was 11:30 p.m. last night. The note read, "I hope she was worth half your company, David. Don't bother looking for me. Speak to Mr. Sterling." Yes. David stared at the receipt. The Gilded Lily. His blood ran cold. That was where he had been last night. That was where he had been with Jessica. He looked at the room number printed on the receipt. Room 412. David and Jessica had been in room 414. Sarah had been in the room next door. All night. To understand how Sarah Jenkins, a woman known for her patience, her soft voice, and her charity galas, executed a disappearance worthy of a spy novel, you have to go back 6 months. The marriage hadn't exploded all at once. It had eroded, like a cliff face battered by the sea. They had been married for 12 years. They had met at UPenn. David was the charismatic business major with big dreams and empty pockets. Sarah was the quiet art history major whose grandfather happened to have founded Jenkins Logistics, a shipping empire that moved goods across the entire eastern seaboard. David always claimed he didn't know about the money until after the second date. Sarah chose to believe him. 6 months ago, the dynamic shifted. David had finally secured the CEO position at his own tech consultancy firm, Vector and Void, a company built largely on the seed capital Sarah had loaned him and later forgave. Success made David bold. Boldness made him careless. It started with the phone, the classic sign. He began taking it into the bathroom. He changed the passcode. When Sarah asked to borrow it to Google a recipe one evening, he practically tackled her to snatch it back. "It's work confidential, Sarah. You know we're dealing with sensitive IP," he had snapped, his face flushing a mottled red. Sarah had just nodded, stirring the risotto. "Okay, David. I'm sorry." But Sarah wasn't sorry. She was observant. The next week they attended a gala for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. David was preening in his tuxedo, holding court with a group of potential investors. Sarah stood by his side, the perfect corporate wife, smiling until her cheeks ached. That's when she walked up. "David, I didn't know you'd be here." The woman was young, perhaps 26, sharp features, hungry eyes, and a red dress that cost more than David's first car. "Jessica," David said. His voice dropped an octave, a physiological reaction he couldn't control. "Sarah, this is Jessica Miller. She's the new aggressive sales lead we hired." "A pleasure," Jessica said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, her nails manicured into sharp talons. She didn't look at Sarah. She looked through Sarah. "Jessica has been instrumental in the new merger," David added, nervous energy radiating off him. "Oh, David is too kind," Jessica purred, placing a hand on David's forearm. She left it there a second too long. "He's the genius. I'm just along for the ride." Sarah saw it. The electricity. The way David leaned into her touch instead of pulling away. The way Jessica's eyes flickered to David's lips when he spoke. It wasn't just a flirtation. It was an established intimacy. Sarah didn't make a scene. She didn't throw her wine in Jessica's face. She simply took a sip of her Pinot Grigio and smiled. "It's lovely to meet you, Jessica," Sarah said. "David speaks so highly of his team." Later that night, in the car ride home, David was euphoric. "Did you see how impressed the Peterson brothers were? We're going to close that deal, Sarah. We're going to be billionaires." "That's wonderful, honey," Sarah said, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. "You're quiet," David noted, loosening his tie. "You okay?" "Just tired," she lied. She wasn't tired. She was calculating. The next day, Sarah did something she had promised herself she would never do. She didn't snoop through his phone. She didn't follow him. She called her grandfather's old lawyer, Arthur Sterling. Arthur was 70 years old, a man who wore three-piece suits in July and scared other lawyers simply by clearing his throat. He had managed the Jenkins family trust for 40 years. He loved Sarah like a daughter, and he had never trusted David. "Sarah, my dear," Arthur's gravelly voice came over the line. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Arthur," Sarah said, her voice steady, "I need you to look into something for me. Financially." "Is it David?" Arthur asked immediately. "Yes. I want to know where the money is going, specifically the consulting fees from the last 2 quarters. I'll have a forensic audit done by Friday. Anything else?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I need you to recommend a private investigator. The best one you know. Someone who doesn't exist on paper." There was a pause on the line. Then Arthur let out a low, grim chuckle. "I have just the man. His name is Cole. He's expensive, Sarah." "I don't care about the cost, Arthur," Sarah said, looking at the wedding photo on her desk. David's smiling face, so full of promise. "I just want the truth." The truth, as it turned out, was much worse than she imagined. It wasn't just Jessica. There were dinners, weekend trips disguised as conferences in Miami, jewelry purchases from accounts David thought were hidden. But the real twist, the one that hardened Sarah's heart from sadness to cold steel, came 3 weeks later. Cole, the investigator, met Sarah in a park, far away from their home. He handed her a USB drive and a folder. "The photos are in there," Cole said, lighting a cigarette. "Standard stuff. Hotels, restaurants, hands in places they shouldn't be. But you should look at the audio transcript on the last page." "Audio?" Sarah asked. "I bugged his car," Cole shrugged. "You pay for the premium package, you get the premium service." Sarah opened the folder to the last page. It was a transcript of a conversation between David and Jessica from 2 days prior. "David, I can't just leave her yet, Jess. You know that." "Jessica, why? You said you were bored? You said she's a frump." "David, it's not about her. It's the Jenkins Trust. Her grandfather set it up so that on her 40th birthday, which is in 6 months, the full control of the logistics fleet transfers to her. If I'm still her husband, I get a seat on the board. I get access to the shipping lanes for Vector and Void. Jessica. And once you have the seat? David. Then I file. I take half her assets. I keep my board seat, and you and I retire to Como, but I have to play the loving husband until October. Jessica. Ugh, fine. But you better buy me something nice for waiting. Sarah read the words twice. The wind rustled the leaves around her, but she felt completely still. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was farming her. He was waiting to harvest her inheritance and then discard her like a husk. She closed the folder. She didn't cry. The time for tears was over. She looked at Cole. Keep watching him. I need to know his schedule for the next month, every minute. What are you planning, Mrs. Reynolds? Cole asked, raising an eyebrow. Sarah stood up, smoothing her skirt. My 40th birthday is in October. That gives me 5 months. To fix it? No, Sarah said, her eyes turning to ice. To burn it all down. For the next 4 months, the Reynolds household became a theatre, and Sarah was giving an Academy Award-winning performance. David grew more arrogant by the day. He stopped hiding his phone. He came home smelling of perfume more often, offering lazy excuses like, "I hugged a client's wife, hello." He was so confident in his plan, waiting for Sarah's 40th birthday to seize the board seat, that he didn't notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere. He didn't notice that Sarah had stopped asking about his day. He didn't notice that the vintage wine collection in the cellar was slowly thinning out, bottle by bottle. Sarah was busy. Her days were no longer filled with charity luncheons or yoga. They were filled with war rooms. She spent her afternoons in the mahogany-panelled office of Arthur Sterling. The forensic audit had returned, and it was a bloodbath. David had siphoned nearly $400,000 from their joint accounts into a shell company called JMR Holdings, Jessica Miller Reynolds. He had already named the shell company after his mistress using his last name. That level of disrespect didn't just sting, it clarified everything. "He's sloppy," Arthur said one Tuesday afternoon, sliding a thick document across his desk. "He thinks he's a shark, but he's a goldfish in a shark tank." He forgot that the initial seed money for Vector and Void was structured as a convertible note, not a gift. Sarah picked up the document. "Explain it to me like I'm 5, Arthur." Arthur smiled, a shark-like grin that suited him. "It means, my dear, that you don't just own the debt of his company. Because he missed 3 interest payments last year, which he hid from you, you have the right to convert that debt into equity, controlling equity." "I can take his company?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet. "You can take 60% of it," Arthur corrected. "But we need him to sign a waiver acknowledging the debt restructuring. If we frame it as a tax loophole to save him money on the upcoming merger, he'll sign it without reading it. Men like David never read the fine print when they think they're saving a buck." The trap was set. Now, Sarah had to bait it. That evening, Sarah prepared David's favorite meal, cedar plank salmon with asparagus. She dressed in a soft cashmere sweater, poured him a glass of the '96 Cabernet he loved, and waited. David came in at 8 or 10 p.m., flushed and manic. "Big day, Sarah, huge day. The Peterson brothers are practically begging to invest." "That's amazing, honey," Sarah cooed, setting the plate down. "You're working so hard." David devoured the food, talking endlessly about his brilliance, about how Vector and Void was going to revolutionize tech consulting. Sarah nodded, timing her moment. "Oh, David," she said casually, pouring him more wine. "Arthur sent over some boring tax paperwork today. Something about the family trust and lowering our liability for next year. He said if we restructure the debt on the business loan I gave you, we could save about $50,000 in taxes." David's ears perked up. 50 grand? Sarah hummed, taking a sip of water. "I didn't really understand it, but he put these little 'sign here' stickers on it. I already signed. It's on the counter if you want to look at it." David laughed, wiping his mouth. "You and your grandfather's dusty old lawyers, always worrying about pennies." He walked over to the counter, picked up the pen, and flipped through the pages rapidly. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. If he read Clause 4, Section B, he would see that he was signing away majority control of his life's work. "God, this is thick," David muttered. "You don't have to sign it tonight," Sarah said, feigning indifference. She stood up and started clearing the table. "I can just tell Arthur we're not interested in the deduction." No, David said quickly. 50 grand is 50 grand. He didn't read it. He signed his name with a flourish on the last page. David A. Reynolds. "Done," he said, tossing the pen down. "Easy." Sarah turned away to hide the cold smile spreading across her face. "Thanks, honey. You're so good at handling the business side of things." The next phase involved the house. The prenuptial agreement stated that anything acquired during the marriage was marital property, subject to a 50-50 split unless it was a direct inheritance. The house was bought with Sarah's inheritance, but David had put his name on the deed for credit purposes years ago. She needed him off the deed. 2 weeks later, Sarah staged a breakdown. She cried about the pressure of the upcoming board transfer. She told David she was terrified of being sued by disgruntled trucking unions once she took over Jenkins Logistics. "They could take everything, David," she sobbed into his chest. "They could take the house." David, smelling an opportunity to look like a hero and protect his future asset, patted her hair. "Shh, it's okay. What do you want to do?" Arthur says, "He says if I transfer the house solely into a liability protection trust, the unions can't touch it. But I can't be the trustee. It has to be you. But the deed has to be in the trust's name, not ours." David's eyes lit up. He thought she was giving him control of the house via the trust. "I'll do it, Sarah," he said solemnly. "I'll protect us." He signed the deed transfer the next day. What he didn't know, because, again, he didn't read the trust bylaws Arthur had drafted, was that the Reynolds Liability Trust had a dissolution clause. Upon the filing of divorce by the primary beneficiary, Sarah, the trust would dissolve and the asset would revert entirely to the original purchaser. Sarah. He had just legally gifted her the house back, thinking he was stealing it. By late September, the web was complete. Sarah owned his company. Sarah owned the house. And thanks to the PI, Sarah had the date of his final betrayal. David told her he had a strategy retreat at the Gilded Lily Hotel on the night of September 30th. He claimed it would be an all-nighter with the Peterson brothers. Cole, the PI, confirmed the reservation. Room 414, booked under Mr. and Mrs. Smith. "So cliché," Sarah whispered to herself, looking at the calendar. September 30th. That was the night. The morning of September 30th was grey and drizzly. David was packing his overnight bag. He packed his best suit, a bottle of cologne, and, Sarah noted with a pang of disgust, a box of condoms tucked into his toiletry kit. "I'll probably be home early tomorrow morning," David said, kissing her on the cheek. His lips felt like dry leaves. "Don't wait up. The Peterson brothers can be intense." "Good luck, David," Sarah said. "I have a feeling this is going to be a night you'll never forget." He laughed, grabbed his bag, and walked out the door. As soon as his Porsche pulled out of the driveway, Sarah's demeanor changed instantly. The grieving, anxious wife vanished. The CEO emerged. She picked up her phone. "Arthur, he's gone. Execute Phase 1. Within an hour, a white van pulled up to the house. It wasn't movers. It was an archival team. They weren't taking furniture. They were taking evidence. Sarah had catalogued every expensive watch, every piece of art, every asset David had bought with joint funds. These were being moved to secure storage to be appraised for the divorce settlement. Then Sarah packed her own bag. Not for a getaway, but for a business meeting. She put on her war paint, a tailored black dress, Louboutin heels, and the diamond earrings her grandfather had left her. She drove into the city, her heart beating with a rhythm of pure adrenaline. She arrived at the Gilded Lily at 6:00 p.m. She walked to the front desk. "Check in for Sarah Jenkins," she said. She had stopped using Reynolds on reservations weeks ago. "Welcome, Ms. Jenkins. You're in room 412. "Thank you. And has the party in room 415 checked in?" The concierge tapped on the keyboard. "Yes, ma'am. About 20 minutes ago. A Mr. Smith." "Excellent." Sarah went up to her room. It shared a wall with 414. The walls in the Gilded Lily were thick, but the balconies were connected by a mere partition of wrought iron and ivy. She stepped out onto the balcony. The city rain was falling harder now. She could hear voices from the next balcony. The sliding door to 414 was cracked open to let in the breeze. "Can't believe she bought the tax thing." David's voice drifted over, accompanied by the pop of a champagne cork. "She's clueless, Jess. Totally clueless." "To us," Jessica's voice giggled. "To the future board member of Jenkins Logistics." "To us," David toasted. "And to finally getting rid of the dead weight." Sarah stood in the shadows of her balcony, listening. A month ago, this would have destroyed her. Now, it just confirmed she was doing the right thing. She went back inside room 412. There was a knock at her door. She opened it to reveal 3 men in suits. One was Arthur Sterling. The other 2 were the Peterson brothers, the very men David thought he was meeting with, or rather, lying about meeting with, were standing in Sarah's room. "Gentlemen," Sarah said, gesturing for them to enter. "Thank you for coming. Mrs. Reynolds, or should I say, Ms. Jenkins," the elder Peterson, a gruff man named Thomas, began. "Your lawyer said you had a counter-offer regarding Vector and Void?" "I do," Sarah said, sitting down and crossing her legs. "As of 2 weeks ago, I am the majority shareholder of Vector and Void. I hold 60% of the equity." She slid the papers David had signed across the coffee table. The Peterson brothers looked at the documents, then at each other. "David has been pitching you a merger," Sarah continued, her voice calm and authoritative. "He wants to sell you the company for $20 million. But David doesn't own the company. I do." "And what is your pitch?" Thomas Peterson asked, intrigued. "I don't want $20 million, Sarah said. "I want to liquidate. I'm willing to sell you the IP, the client list, and the software patents for $10 million. A fire sale. But the deal has to be signed tonight." The Peterson brothers' eyes widened. It was a steal. They would acquire the tech for half its value. "Why?" the younger brother asked. "Why undercut your own husband?" "Ex-husband," Sarah corrected. "And let's just say, I'm cleaning house." "Where is David now?" Thomas asked. "He told us he was in New York." Sarah smiled, a tight, dangerous smile. She pointed a manicured finger at the wall behind her. "He's in the next room, cheating on me with his assistant, spending money he no longer has." The room went silent. The Peterson brothers looked at the wall, then back at Sarah with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. In the business world, information was currency, and Sarah just proved she was the richest person in the room. "We'll sign," Thomas said, pulling out a pen. By 9:00 p.m., the deal was done. Sarah had sold David's company out from under him while he was drinking champagne 10 feet away. The funds were wired directly into a trust account David couldn't touch. Vector and Void was no longer his. He was the CEO of a shell, an empty box. Arthur packed up the papers. "You're a cold woman, Sarah," he said, but his eyes were shining with pride. "Your grandfather would have loved this." "I'm not done, Arthur," Sarah said. She took the receipt from her room service, a pot of tea and a club sandwich, and flipped it over. She wrote the note. "I hope she was worth half your company, David. Don't bother looking for me. Speak to Mr. Sterling. 4. Arthur, I need you to ensure this gets onto the kitchen island at the house before 6 a.m. I have a flight to catch." "Where are you going?" "Paris," Sarah said. "I have a new life to start, and David has a very bad morning ahead of him." She waited until midnight. She heard the sounds from room 414 die down. She walked out into the hallway, slipped the "Do Not Disturb" sign onto their door handle just to be petty, and took the elevator down to the lobby. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt lighter than she had in years. She didn't look back at the hotel window. She got into the waiting town car. To the airport, please, she told the driver. Back in room 414, David slept the sleep of the ignorant, unaware that he was no longer a CEO, no longer a homeowner, and no longer a husband. He was a ghost, and he wouldn't know it until the sun came up. David stared at the note on the kitchen island until the words blurred into meaningless black squiggles. Speak to Mr. Sterling. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through the fog of his hangover. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling so badly he dropped it twice before dialing Jessica. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice groggy and irritated. David, it's 6:30 in the morning. We just left each other 5 hours ago. She knows, David rasped. Jessica, she knows everything. She's gone. What do you mean, gone? Jessica yawned. Like, to her mother's? No, her closet is empty. She left a divorce petition on the counter, and she mentioned the hotel. There was a pause on the line. The sleepiness vanished from Jessica's voice, replaced by a sharp, calculating tone. She mentioned the hotel? How? She left a receipt. She was there, Jess. She was at the Gilded Lily last night. Wait, Jessica said, her voice rising. If she knows, David, what about the board seat? What about the money? You said you needed to stay married until October. I don't know, David shouted, the sound echoing in the empty, silent kitchen. I need to get to the office. I need to check the accounts. Meet me there in an hour. I have a dentist appointment, Jessica lied smoothly. Jessica, this is serious. Call me when you fix it, David, she said, and the line went dead. David swore and sprinted to the garage. He hammered the button for the garage door opener. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Still nothing. He ran to the wall panel. Dead. What the hell? He muttered. He tried to manually lift the heavy cedar door, straining until his back popped, but the electronic lock was engaged. He was trapped in his own house. He had to exit through the front door and call an Uber, standing on the curb of his multi-million-dollar estate in yesterday's wrinkled suit, looking like a discarded party favor. When he finally arrived at the Vector and Void headquarters, a sleek glass building in the financial district, it was 7:45 a.m. He marched toward the turnstiles, ready to do damage control. He slapped his badge against the reader. Beep, beep. Red light. Access denied. He tried again. Beep, beep. Hey, Jerry, David shouted at the security guard, a man he had ignored every morning for 3 years. There's something wrong with the gate. Let me in. Jerry didn't look up from his monitor. He pressed a button on his desk, and the glass doors to the lobby slid open, but not to let David in. 2 large men in dark, tactical uniforms stepped out. David Reynolds? One of them asked. Yes, I'm the CEO of this company. Get out of my way. Not anymore, sir, the guard said calmly. We have orders to escort you off the premises. Your personal effects have already been mailed to your residence. Escort me? David laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. I built this place. I own it. The elevator doors behind the security desk pinged open. Thomas Peterson stepped out. He was wearing a fresh suit and holding a coffee mug. David's coffee mug. Thomas! David yelled, waving his arms. Thank God. Tell these gorillas who I am. We have a deal to sign, right? The merger? Thomas Peterson walked over to the glass partition. He looked at David with a mixture of pity and disdain. There is no merger, David, Thomas said, his voice muffled by the glass, but clearly audible. We bought the assets last night from the majority shareholder. Majority shareholder? That's me. No, Thomas shook his head. It was Miss Jenkins, Sarah. She held the debt, David. You signed the conversion paperwork 2 weeks ago. Tax loophole, remember? The memory hit David like a physical blow. The dinner, the wine, Sarah's sweet smile as she handed him the boring tax documents. 50 grand is 50 grand, he had said. He hadn't saved 50 grand. He had signed away a company valued at $40 million. She can't do that, David stammered, gripping the turnstile. That's fraud. It's legally binding, Thomas said. She sold us the IP and the client list. Vector and Void is just a shell now. It's bankrupt, David. And since you're the CEO of the shell, you're liable for the outstanding lease on this building, which, by the way, is 3 months overdue. Thomas took a sip of coffee. You should probably go, David, before we call the police for trespassing. David stumbled back onto the sidewalk. The morning rain had started again. He stood there, wet and shivering, people rushing past him with umbrellas. He had no car, no office, no company. His phone buzzed. It was an email from Arthur Sterling. Subject: Notice to vacate Mr. Reynolds, per the terms of the Reynolds Liability Trust, which you voluntarily established and signed. The dissolution of the marriage triggers the immediate reversion of the property at 14 Oak Lane to the original purchaser, Sarah Jenkins. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. The locks will be changed at 8 a.m. on Thursday. Regards, Arthur Sterling. Escast. David dropped his phone on the wet pavement. The screen shattered. He stared at the spiderweb cracks over his reflection. In the span of 12 hours, Sarah hadn't just divorced him. She had deleted him. 3 weeks later. David was living in a depressing extended-stay motel off the highway. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. His credit cards had been frozen pending the divorce hearing. He was surviving on the cash he had managed to withdraw before the accounts were locked, about $4,000. It wouldn't last long. Jessica was gone. The moment the news broke that Vector and Void had been liquidated and David was penniless, she sent him a text. This is too much drama for me. I'm going back to Chicago. Don't contact me. She hadn't even bothered to break up with him in person. David spent his days drinking cheap scotch and leaving voicemail messages for Sarah that went straight to a full inbox. He oscillated between rage and begging. Then, the summons came. It wasn't a court date. It was a request for a deposition at the offices of Sterling and Associates. David shaved, put on his only remaining clean suit, and took a taxi to the law firm. He felt a flicker of hope. If he could just see Sarah, if he could just talk to her, he could manipulate her. He was good at that. He would play the victim. He would cry. Sarah had a soft heart. She would cave. He walked into the conference room. It was an intimidating space, with a long glass table and a view of the harbour where Jenkins logistics ships were currently docking. Arthur Sterling sat at the head of the table. To his right sat Sarah. She looked breathtaking. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that screamed power. Her hair was cut into a sharp, chic bob. She looked 10 years younger. She didn't look like the weeping, anxious wife he had left at home. She looked like a CEO. Sarah, David breathed, moving toward her. Baby, please, we need to talk. Sit down, Mr. Reynolds, Arthur barked. Sarah didn't flinch. She watched him approach with the same detached interest one might show a bug on a windshield. I didn't want to do this through lawyers, David said, sinking into the chair opposite her. Sarah, I made a mistake, a horrible mistake. But you destroyed my life. You stole my company. You kicked me out of our home. My home, Sarah corrected calmly. Her voice was smooth, devoid of any tremor. And I didn't steal your company, David. I collected on a debt. That's just business. You taught me that. I love you, David tried, pulling out his ace card. He forced tears into his eyes. I was lost. Jessica meant nothing. She was just a distraction. I was stressed about providing for us. Sarah laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Arthur, play the tape," she said. Arthur pressed a button on his laptop. The room was filled with the sound of static, and then David's voice rang out clear as a bell. "It's not about her, it's the Jenkins Trust. If I'm still her husband, I get a seat on the board. Then I file. I take half her assets. I have to play the loving husband until October." David's face went white. He recognized the conversation. It was from the car. The day he told Jessica the plan. "You bugged my car," he whispered. "I did," Sarah said. "I've known for 6 months, David. Every time you kissed me, I knew. Every time you came home smelling like her, I knew. Every time you lied to my face about wanting to protect our future, I knew you were planning to rob me blind." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "You thought I was stupid," she said softly. "That was your fatal mistake. You thought because I was kind, I was weak. You thought because I let you play businessman with my money, that you actually earned it." "I built that company." David slammed his hand on the table. "You built a house of cards on a foundation I paid for," Sarah shot back. "And I decided to pull the bottom card." "I want a settlement," David sneered, dropping the act. "I want alimony. I was accustomed to a certain lifestyle. You can't just leave me with nothing. The law entitles me to half the marital assets." Arthur Sterling cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Reynolds, we are prepared to offer you a settlement." David sat back, crossing his arms. "Finally. Let's hear it. 5 million?" Arthur slid a single piece of paper across the table. "This is a check for 25,000, Arthur said. "Is this a joke?" David spat. "No," Sarah answered. "It's a kindness. According to the forensic audit, you embezzled nearly $400,000 from our joint accounts to fund your affair. Legally, I could have you prosecuted for fraud and theft. I could send you to prison, David." David froze. "However," Sarah continued, standing up and smoothing her jacket, "I don't want to spend the next 2 years in court battles with you. I want you gone. This $25,000 is for you to start over. Somewhere else. If you sign the divorce papers today, you get the check and I won't press charges. If you fight me, I will spend every penny of my inheritance making sure you end up in a cell." She looked at him with absolute finality. "Take the deal, David. It's more than you deserve." David looked at the check. Then he looked at Sarah. He searched for a trace of the woman who used to make him coffee and listen to his dreams. She wasn't there. He realized then that he was completely outmatched. He had been playing checkers while she was playing 4D chess. With a shaking hand, he picked up the pen. He signed the divorce papers. Arthur snatched the papers away immediately. Sarah placed the check on the table. "Goodbye, David," she said. She turned and walked toward the door. "Sarah," David called out, his voice cracking. She paused, her hand on the door handle. She didn't turn around. "Was it all a lie?" he asked. "The last 12 years?" Sarah looked at the doorframe. "The first 6 years were the best of my life," she said softly. "The last 6. I was just waiting for you to be the man I thought you were. But he never showed up." She opened the door and walked out, leaving David alone in the glass room with a check for 25,000 and the silence of a life thoroughly dismantled. 1 year later, the October wind whipped through the streets of Boston, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and exhaust fumes. It was the same kind of grey, heavy day as the one where David Reynolds had come home to an empty closet. But for Sarah Jenkins, The weather was the only thing that hadn't changed. Sarah stood on the balcony of the Jenkins Logistics headquarters. The office was on the 40th floor, overlooking the harbor, where giant cranes were loading shipping containers onto a vessel painted in her company's signature deep blue. She took a sip of her espresso. It was 8 a.m., and she had already closed a deal with a European distributor that would increase their quarterly revenue by 15%. Ms. Jenkins? Sarah turned. Her new assistant, a sharp young man named Leo, stood in the doorway holding a tablet. The car is ready for the Women in Business Summit, and Mr. Sterling is on line 1. Put Arthur through, Sarah said, walking back to her desk, a slab of reclaimed wood that looked far more imposing than the marble island she used to cry over. Sarah, Arthur's voice boomed over the speakerphone. I just wanted to congratulate you. The stock price hit an all-time high this morning. We worked hard for it, Arthur. Sarah smiled. How are you enjoying retirement? I'm bored to tears. I might come back just to annoy you. By the way, I thought you should know. A discrepancy popped up in the final tax audit for the dissolution of the Reynolds Trust. It's settled now, but it required us to track down Mr. Reynolds for a signature. Sarah's hand paused over her laptop. She hadn't said his name in months. And? He's in Ohio, Sarah. He's working as a regional sales rep for a paper supply company. He's living in a studio apartment. He signed the papers without reading them. Old habits die hard. Sarah felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't pity. It wasn't joy. It was simply indifference. The man who had once been the sun around which her entire world orbited was now just a signature on a tax form in Ohio. Thank you, Arthur, she said. I have to run. I'm keynoting the summit. Go get 'em, Tiger, the old lawyer chuckled. Sarah grabbed her coat. As she walked out, she caught her reflection in the glass doors. She wore the Patek Philippe watch she had bought for herself last month, the exact model David had always drooled over but couldn't afford. It looked better on her. Meanwhile, in Columbus, Ohio, David Reynolds sat in a grey cubicle that smelled of stale coffee and carpet cleaner. His tie was cheap polyester, and it was choking him. Reynolds, a 25-year-old manager with a patchy beard and a headset, leaned over the partition. You're under quota for the month. If you don't move 500 units of copy paper by Friday, we're going to have a conversation about your future here. I'm working on it, Kyle, David muttered, his jaw tight. The leads are weak. The leads are fine. You're just not closing. Kyle snapped, popping a piece of gum. Get on the phones. David stared at the phone. He hated the phone. Every time it rang, he hoped it was a mistake. He hoped it was a recruiter telling him Vector and Void was back, that it was all a bad dream. But Vector and Void was gone. The Peterson brothers had stripped it for parts and merged the tech into their own systems. David's reputation in Boston was radioactive. No one would hire a CEO who had been outmaneuvered so publicly by his wife. He had burned through the $25,000 settlement in 3 months, trying to maintain his lifestyle, buying rounds of drinks for women who looked like Jessica, but left as soon as the credit card was declined. Jessica. He had looked her up once. She was married now to a dermatologist in Chicago. She posted photos of her golden retrievers and her perfect life. She never mentioned David. He was just a stepping stone she had tripped over. David sighed and opened his browser to check the news, trying to delay the inevitable cold calls. He clicked on Business Insider. The headline on the front page stopped his heart. The Quiet Storm. How Sarah Jenkins transformed a legacy logistics brand into a modern tech giant. There she was. The photo was high definition, glossy, and terrifying. Sarah was sitting on the edge of a desk, arms crossed, looking directly into the camera. She looked powerful. She looked lethal. And she looked beautiful. David read the article, his eyes stinging. When asked about her rapid rise to success over the last year, Ms. Jenkins credits a restructuring of her personal and professional life. "I learned that dead weight slows you down," Jenkins says. "Sometimes you have to cut the anchor to let the ship sail." The anchor. He was the anchor. He wasn't the captain. He wasn't the visionary. He was just the heavy, rusting weight that had been dragging her down for 12 years. And the moment she cut him loose, she soared. A tear leaked out of David's eye and splashed onto his cheap polyester tie. "Reynolds! Less reading! More dialing!" Kyle shouted from across the room. David closed the browser window. He picked up the phone. He dialed a number for a mid-sized printing firm in Dayton. "Hi," David said, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the charm that used to come so easily, the charm that had won him Sarah, the charm he had wasted on lies. "This is David, from Elite Paper Solutions. Do you have a minute to talk about your copier needs?" The line crackled. "Not interested," the voice said, and clicked off. The dial tone hummed in his ear. It was a lonely, monotonous sound. It was the sound of his new life. David hung up the phone. He looked at the blank screen where Sarah's face had been. He finally understood the price of his betrayal. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the house. It was the realization that he had held a diamond in his hand, mistook it for glass, and threw it away. And now he had to watch it shine from a distance, forever out of reach. David Reynolds learned the hard way that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting, it's the one listening. He thought Sarah was weak because she was quiet. He didn't realize she wasn't submitting. She was strategizing. In the end, David got exactly what he wanted. A life without Sarah. But he forgot that a life without Sarah meant a life without the woman who made him who he was. He lost his queen, and in the game of chess, once the queen is gone, it's only a matter of time before the king falls. Wow, that was intense. Sarah really went for the scorched earth policy, didn't she? But honestly, after what David did, planning to steal her inheritance and run off with his assistant, did he deserve anything less? I want to know what you think. Was Sarah's revenge justified, or was leaving him penniless too cruel? If you were in Sarah's shoes, would you have taken the company, or just walked away? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We drop new drama every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you betray. You never know who's keeping score.